Episode 4, Beyond Your Frame. We've learned to recognize cognitive frames in others, but what about your own? If Alice and Bob's frames were shaped by years of experience and neural pruning, does that mean they're permanent, fixed aspects of personality that you simply have to work around? Not at all. The same neuroplasticity that built your frame keeps it changeable throughout your life. Remember, your frame is the accumulated result of neural pruning, connections strengthened by practice and experience, others weakened by disuse. But that process never stops. Every time you deliberately attend to something new, practice an unfamiliar skill, or work to understand a different perspective, you're influencing which connections get reinforced and which ones develop. The person who frustrates you today by approaching problems so differently may be actively expanding their cognitive frame in ways you can't see. This doesn't mean you can instantly rewire yourself to think like someone else, or that cognitive differences are just a matter of insufficient effort. The patterns carved by decades of experience run deep, but it does mean that understanding your frame gives you leverage over how it develops. You recognize that you tend to process information by focusing on logical analysis rather than relational dynamics. That's not a life sentence. It's information about where you have natural strength and where you might choose to develop additional capacity. There are frameworks that can help with this recognition, tools like Myers-Briggs or the Jungian cognitive functions that inspired it, but only if you use them carefully. Used well, these frameworks function as a kind of grammar for describing cognitive frames. You might notice that Alice tends to construct understanding by extrapolating from patterns and possibilities, while Bob builds from concrete facts and direct experience. That's useful information for understanding why Alice gets excited about implications while Bob wants to nail down logistics first. There's a dangerous way to use these frameworks. The grammar becomes a limitation. I'm not good with emotions. She doesn't see the big picture. He can't make objective decisions. This is backwards. The point isn't to accept your frame as fixed reality. It's to recognize how you currently organize information so you can work with that process more deliberately and expand it when useful. Which brings us to the most profound implication of understanding cognitive frames. When you become curious about how someone else constructs reality, you're not just being diplomatic. You're exposing yourself to a different way of organizing information, attending to details, solving problems. Some of that exposure stays with you. Your own frame becomes more flexible, more capable of seeing situations from angles that wouldn't have occurred to you before. Alice doesn't have to become Bob to benefit from understanding how Bob's cognitive processes work. But spending time genuinely trying to understand his perspective changes how Alice approaches problems in the future. Her frame expands. Go back to those two friends walking out of the movie theater. Sarah thinks the film was brilliant. Mike thinks it was boring. In the old understanding, this is a problem to solve. One of them missed what was obviously there, or saw something that wasn't really there. The conversation becomes forensic, reviewing evidence, building cases for correct interpretation. But now we can see what actually happened. Two brains, 99.9% identical in architecture, constructed different experiences from the same sequence of images and sounds. Not because one malfunctioned, but because their frames, their accumulated histories of attention, experience, and pattern recognition, brought different expectations to what they watched. One person's cognitive construction highlighted the film's restraint and subtext. The others registered that same restraint as emptiness. Neither construction is wrong. They're different. The conversation they could have now is entirely different. Instead of debating whether the film was actually good or actually boring, they could explore how each person's frame generated their experience. What was each person attending to? What experiences were they drawing on to make sense of what they watched? This isn't a polite way to avoid disagreement. It's recognition that the disagreement was never about the film. It was about two cognitive construction processes meeting, two different ways of organizing the same information into meaning. The shift from who's right to how are we each thinking changes something fundamental about human conversation. You're no longer defending your truth against theirs. You're two people with nearly identical brains that got configured differently through different histories, trying to understand how each other thinks. That conversation, that mutual exploration of frames, is where real communication happens. And when you stop trying to win conversations and start trying to understand them, you discover that the 0.1% that makes each person unique isn't a barrier to connection. It's the most interesting part of any conversation.